Hello, everyone. My name is Marcus Vaughn. I'm the co-founder of Illumina, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, the Big Resilience Reset Part 3. This is the no holds barred webinar of the resilience industry. So looking forward to a really big session today. And if you haven't found your way to the chat panel, please do make your way in. That's where half of this conversation typically takes place. We've got a big session today, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by two resilience superstars from opposite ends of the world. Firstly, let me introduce Rina Singh. Rina Singh is an award-winning resilience practitioner and also the host and owner of the Resilience Pod podcast. And she's a very good friend to us here at Illumina, and it is amazing to have you back. Rina, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. Yes, all good. Thanks for having me again. So excited.
Always excited to have you on, Rina. So also with us today, filling in for James Green, funnily enough, is another powerhouse when it comes to resilience, Vanessa Vaughn Mathews, who's the founder and chief resilience officer, I love that title, of Asfalis Advisors. She's also the host and co-owner in partnership with the DRJ of the Business Resilience Decoded podcast. Also, great friend to Illumina and all-round superstar for joining us today. Vanessa, welcome.
Hey, happy to be here, and wish I was on the other side of the world with you and Rina.
Well, we're very, very different opposite ends, but we have a super diverse audience here today, guys. So thanks to everyone who's dialed in and registered. To just give you a little bit of insight, we've got practitioners and professionals from over 150 different countries today, including a massive turnout from the United Kingdom, the USA. Canada's showed up in force, so thanks very much, Canada. We also have people dialing in from Germany, Switzerland, Australia, of course, the early risers. It is actually 6 a.m. on the east coast of Australia, so thank you to all the Aussies. I saw Joe Mansour turn up before. New Zealand, Taiwan, South Africa, Botswana, Zambia, Trinidad and Tobago, and United Arab Emirates, amongst many more that have also dialed in. So we've got a global audience here today, and as I mentioned before, if you haven't found your way into the chat function, you'll find in this webinar half of the conversation happens in the chat function. So our approach here is there's not really a lot of slides that we're going to get through. We're just going to get stuck into some big topics, ask some pretty big questions, and we'll be throwing questions to the audience on the way through. So feel free to throw in your thoughts and questions into the chat function as we go through, and we'll cover off what we can cover off in that period of time. Let me get rid of our holding screen and we might get started. So obviously it's Business Continuity Awareness Week this week, which is obviously very big on everyone's calendar, especially if you're heavily involved in the BCI or a big promoter of it. And everything's focused around hybrid, which is this new world we seem to find ourselves in. I'm at home and sometimes I'm in the office and I'm doing Zoom or Teams meetings, regardless of where I am. The question mark is, are we actually going back to the office? Does it even matter? And what's the relevance of a resilience practitioner if we are or aren't? Rina, I mean, what's your take on hybrid at the moment? How does it feel? How is your job unfolding in the world of hybrid?
It's very much hybrid. I've probably gone to the office 3 or 4 times in the last 2 years, which is great because I like working from home. Obviously, some people don't. However, every time I have been in the office, all I have seen is people sit on Zoom calls or Teams calls. And it kind of, for me, defeats the whole point of being in the office, because the whole factor is like you've got to go in, collaborate, see each other, but it's like, oh no, wait, I can't talk to you or have a coffee or a conversation because I've got a meeting now and I'm going to be on a call for 3 hours. So yeah, bye. So I'm a bit dubious on this about, is there a need to go back to the office? It's good to have a choice in the matter, because obviously not everybody has the space or the ability to work from home, and everyone's situation is different. But what is the point if we're just on calls all the time from different offices when we can do that from home?
Do you think the resilience practitioners' roles changed now that we're in a hybrid environment?
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably become a bit more difficult. I would say a bit more challenging, because before I would traipse around the office and everybody would know who I am. Business Continuity Awareness Week, I would wear, a fun t-shirt with my team and wander around and be like, oh, that's the BCAW resilience team, and people would know who we are. Whereas it's difficult to get your face seen now. We don't want to go on camera all the time. I'm not always 100% camera ready. Don't feel like it most of the time, to be honest, either, because it's just exhausting looking at yourself, because naturally you're just going to focus on yourself and not everybody else. There's studies to show that women do it more than men. So it's a stress. Okay, so yeah, I feel like it's even harder because we have to do extra work to be seen, to communicate, to get our voices out there, to interact, and you can't really do that behind a blank black box. So it's difficult. I think it's made it harder.
Yeah. Vanessa, you'll have probably a slightly different opinion on this. I mean, you have your own team, of course, in your organization, but you also consult to a lot of major organizations. How is hybrid working? Is it working? And what's the role of a resilience practitioner in this world?
Look, so for a multitude of multiple reasons, I'm taking Rina's quote, we need options. So, okay, prior to COVID, I was in a co-working environment and I was seeing people and around people, and I felt like I could connect and build relationships and talk to people. And now that we're virtual, my husband's now back in the office. My dog passed away. So now I'm home by myself, and it's been 2.5, almost 3 years. And I am craving the need to get out of my house and get out of my space, because I think work also brings its own stresses, and I like my new home. So I want to like the room that my office is in, and I have anxiety when I walk in this room. So I do think that a hybrid model is going to be critical for most of our clients. We are back in the office. And specifically, quote, end quote, I want you to come into my office. I want you to smell the environment. I want you to meet the people. I want you to shake the hands, because there's so much that we just don't get out of context. The body language, how you're really thinking, what you're really feeling. And for the work we do, right, whether it's an audit or an assessment, it's having the understanding of what context were these plans or were these documents or were these practices created based upon how you guys utilize your space. On the other side of the coin, my husband is in financial services. So they kind of lured them in by providing them free lunch every day throughout the pandemic. So then as they start to come in, right, oh, well, now I need your vaccination card. And oh, now you have to scan your key card X number of times a week for us to prove that you're working, right? So I think it's coming with its pluses and minuses. He's back to a hybrid model. So they are in the office Tuesday through Thursday, and then they're out on Mondays and Fridays, and they can work from home. So it's a toss-up. But I think for engagement, it's important.
Well, and that was really the big thing I wanted to draw on. I mean, Rina, you made a great point. Back in the day, you'd have posters up around Business Continuity Awareness Week and maybe wear a funny colored shirt just to stand out and get people involved. Anything to raise awareness around, hey, this is what we do and this is why it's so important. What does that look like now when people aren't in the office or people choose? Because plenty of people, have had to move a long way from their office to be able to afford housing, so they don't want to come in because it's a 2-hour commute. Like that's a really common thing in, I think, every country that I've visited and every team that I've spoken to. Like that's prevalent everywhere. So how do we build engagement when we're in a hybrid environment? How do we build that? Getting people into resilience.
So that's like the $1 million question. And do you know what? It's probably easier to start building engagement for any resilience activity or anything if you've already been in the organization before the pandemic, because the culture. Sean's just written in the comments that being in the office, you can get a feel for the culture. Well, actually, that's so true. But if you're new and you've just gone into a job in the pandemic and you've never actually met anybody or understand the culture, it's really hard, especially if your job is in resilience. So you've got to do a lot of FaceTime time, a lot of communication, a lot of interactive ways. You can't just send emails, you can't go for coffees. In the big resilience reset part 1, I was talking about, oh, I used to pester people to go for coffees. I hated it by the end of it, but it was the way. I know, I could just, let's not go there. In the end it worked, because it was like, okay, let me get to know you, how you're doing, why don't you like business continuity or resilience, how can I make it better for you. You can't do that because no one wants to sit on a call all day, as well. So it's more difficult for that engagement. So you've got to get creative, but then you need the time and space to do that, because we're all under so much pressure to do this now. You've got to deliver your program now, so you can't invest 3 weeks in actually going around the business, introducing yourself and just having a 20-minute chat or 30-minute chat to just be like, hey, I exist, what do you do, like what is your team about?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I know, again, a very different role. I'm not an internal in-house practitioner, but I do have to rely on relationships. And I know a lot of that relationship building, regardless whether it's internal or external, has to come from face-to-face meetings. Like it just does. Like you can't switch virtual out for face-to-face. So I guess the question mark is, do we have to suck it up and go back to the office as just a core requirement of getting the job done?
So I personally think that you cannot replace the in-person environment. And I also think that some of us have such a dynamic personality that the in-person environment or the virtual environment does not really lend to the presence that we have when we walk into spaces. So I have a friend who's a managing partner here in Charlotte for a oversized consulting company. And he told me that one of the things that helped him to climb the ladder is when he was young in his career, his office was sat right outside of the chief risk officer's door. And so every time this person would yell, would scream, would have an issue, this person was right outside the door and he would give him work. And it was the accessibility for me to walk outside of my office and you're there and you're present and you're saying yes to what I need, that allowed him to influence more or to work more across leadership. And over a 30-year career, he's now a managing partner. Mm-hmm. And so what we talked about was, you don't get that exposure when you're online, because it's like, well, crap, I got 2,000 employees or whatever the number is. Which one do I pick from a box, right? So I do think that the presence matters. Also, I'll drop this into the chat. So LinkedIn has a study that they published, I believe back in either 2021 or no, actually it's 2022 on global talent trends. And so it talks about work-life balance, which to me is similar to engagement and hybrid models. And the data shows that globally, 63% of people value work-life balance over compensation. 40% of them care about the colleagues and the culture. So who am I talking to? Who's leading me? Who am I working with? Will make a decision or will help them to determine how long they want to be at the organization. But then the other coin of that is professional development. And I think an in-person environment allows people to grow more professionally. I also teach, and my students need better skills about how to work with people in person and in that type of environment. And so I think that the in-person world can't be replaced. And it does drive engagement. And I agree with some of the comments here in the chat. Like, we've just got to rethink about how we're working and how we're doing business.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, Eric made a great point there, spending time and resource strategically to get people together on a more regular basis and that type of thing, then followed up with a more virtual environment. But I guess the question mark is, okay, just thinking about what you said there, Vanessa, in terms of getting closer to the people you want to learn from and grow from. If you're talking to a new starter in this industry, who is at the very beginning stage of their development and the very beginning stage of their career in resilience, is the advice, go and station yourself at the head office, or at least where your team is, or a congregation of your team is, so you can actually learn and develop and build those relationships, as opposed to station yourself on some beautiful beach out in the Caribbean and do it remotely?
So I think it depends. And I don't think that it's just, one answer that's going to work for everybody. I think it depends on where you are in your career, and with everything, right? Everything is a risk decision. And also it depends on the organization. Like we have some clients, they've closed their their corporate centers and no one's coming back to work. So now they're trying to figure out, how do I keep people engaged on a Zoom call? I mean, I've had people leave my team because for 2.5 years, we were 100% virtual and they were struggling. I couldn't do anything about that because we're a virtual company, right? Like we don't have a brick and mortar. But also you've got people in retail, they don't have an option. You are customer facing and the customers are not always nice. So you've got that added dynamic of the personalities and dealing with the general public. So I think leaders who have employees who do not have the option, like healthcare workers, they can't work from home, right? My dentist can't work from home. So I think that this is probably a conversation that is more in favor of corporate people who have that flexibility. But I think we also have to be cognizant and mindful of, is this everybody else's experience within the organization? Right.
Yeah, there's some great comments coming through in the chat there around, virtual removes a lot of imbalance in the work and levels the playing field. So it actually does work in some instances. Joe's mentioned he loves working from home, but needs the office. I think it probably is also down to a personal level. Some people may, to your point, Vanessa, struggle on Zoom. Some people may absolutely thrive. And I know Josh just threw in there as well, our co-founder of Illumina. It's balanced, deeper face-to-face interaction, but less often, may also, play a really powerful role in terms of building those rapports and getting those relationships kick-started. I'm gonna pivot a little bit, unless Rina, you've got anything you want to close out that point on.
Yeah, one thing is that it reinforces my very first point of having the options and the flexibility, because once we can't go away from this conversation and end it and say, yes, we need just office and just virtual. It just depends on the culture and the flexibility you're giving your staff. Asking them this, like doing a questionnaire and asking them, what do you prefer? Because everyone's situation is different. And Vanessa was saying that, oh yeah, I need the office. So I thought I would be that kind of person because I love being around people and talking, but I actually like being at home now. So it's really strange. So yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely an internal struggle I live with as well. I'm definitely a people person, but I've definitely set myself up to work and spend more time with my family at the end of the day, as well as commuting, as opposed to commuting for 45 minutes or an hour to get home each day. I'm going to pivot a little bit, same conversation, a little bit of a different take though. With hybrid, we have fundamentally changed our level of reliance on technology. I guess cloud computing is one of those big paradigm shifts of our generation at the moment. Everything is in the cloud. Well, nearly everything is in the cloud, apart from a few legacy systems perhaps here and there. But geez, 99% of it's in the cloud. This does create a whole host of opportunity, like the fact that I can run this webinar from here, and you're there, and you're there, and it's amazing, and everyone's dialing in. It also creates risk though, in terms of the fact that we have I guess a totally different array of critical dependencies now from a technology perspective. We've probably got a number of vendors that we rely on, and we all rely on, which could get really interesting. As in, if we lost Zoom, what does that look like? Or Teams, what does that look like? Or AWS infrastructure, which we've seen that go down, what does that look like? I'm interested in your take here, guys, from a resilience practitioner point of view. Has actually moving to the cloud made us less resilient in some ways? Who wants to start on that one?
Go ahead, Rina.
Okay, go. I'll go. Yes and no. So no, because we haven't considered Zoom, Teams as critical. I've had this conversation, like, what would we do if we lost it and we were having like 500 meetings a day or whatever? And IT were like, well, the business hasn't identified these applications as critical to running or whatever BCM objective, whatever that you've done your BIAs against, for example. So no, it's not, and we haven't really thought about it. And it's like, oh crap, we just spent the last 2 years reviewing our business continuity arrangements, and never really asked that question. So in that way, no. But then in other ways, yes, because we were all able to be online in the pandemic and we never had that infrastructure. There were some organizations that just wouldn't let anybody work from home and didn't have that structure set up, which they do now. So they obviously have that resilience. So it really depends on the type of business you are operating in and how much of that resilience you have. So I can't say yes, no, 100% yes, 100% no. It really depends on the business.
Yeah, so we had a really interesting conversation a couple of weeks ago in a webinar around the loss of digital suppliers. And what came out of it, we had Adam Peckman from Aon, who heads up their cyber resilience practice there around risk modeling. And one thing that the insurance market's looking at from a cyber coverage perspective is collecting, obviously, critical vendor data from each of the organizations they're looking to underwrite. And what they're coming across is, lo and behold, there's this list of critical vendors that everyone seems to have. Mm. And so they're looking at it from an accumulation risk perspective. We lose a Salesforce, or to that point before, and the critical infrastructure that supports all the SaaS platforms at scale. And there is this absolute accumulation because we've all just used the number one, category owner in that SaaS space. What does that look like? Vanessa, I mean, have you had this conversation with any clients around rethinking what criticality looks like from a technology perspective since we've all moved?
Like, I feel like you're in Charlotte with me, Marcus. So I was talking to a CEO of a financial services company, and I asked him a question about cyber liability. And he said, well, my MSP provides that. I said, okay, well, is that the same answer you would give your board of directors if they asked you the same question? Because I can almost bet you they don't even know who your MSP is, and nor do they care. So what is your plan and how is the organization working through that? Mm-hmm. And he really didn't have an answer. And so I said, whether or not you have an MSP or not, you are still responsible and you are accountable, right? And you should know at a high level what the data is, what you need to know, and who specifically on your team internally is helping to manage that partnership and that relationship. And what we kind of uncovered was this MSP has been in their environment for over 10 years. They haven't checked if what we originally asked you to do for the past 10 years, are you still doing that? Is it still adding value? And what about today's environment, and specifically from a cyber perspective, what are the things that you're helping us to be able to mitigate? And so I think that, somebody mentioned this in the chat, most people in our space have a lot going on, right? Like there's so many, if you just turn on the news, there's so many things happening. And I do think that it's hard for leaders to manage all of the different things that they might be experiencing. But I do think that we have an over-reliance on technology. Even, when I think about as a kid, I had to learn how to write stuff on paper and how to do things with paper and pencil. And that has immediately gone to iPads. Like my friends' 2-year-olds can run an iPad quicker than I can. So we're not teaching people to back up to paper anymore. We're not doing that. We're just saying, oh, let's get more redundant in a cloud environment. I mean, all of us are dependent on this thing. Like all of us. Or now they put it on our watch. So now it's like, oh, I have a smaller screen. You can still distract me. I can still get the notifications here, right? So I do think that we have an issue there. But here's what I would also say, right? And here's what concerns me, because now that I'm a business owner, I see the other side of the table in the business environment. If we have an over-reliance on the same vendors and the same suppliers, what that tells me is that from a supplier diversity perspective, while your website may say we care about diversity, equity, and inclusion, show me that from a dollars perspective. How many diverse suppliers, women-owned, minority-owned, LGBTQIA+, whatever the diversity mix is, show me how much money you are actually spending per your lines of business. Show me what the general counsel is spending. Show me what the technology team is spending. Show me what the marketing team is spending. And this is evidence that if there's such an over-reliance on these top number 1 and number 2 vendors who are also being hacked every day, and you are a target, then you're obviously not spreading around the wealth that we need from a global perspective to help minority and small businesses to continue to rise. And so I think like that's risk in and of itself.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It almost feels like we do need a way to measure the social currency that comes with that in our assessments of what's happening. So we've got a consistent way to ask that question and have an answer for that around what that looks like. Rina, anything else to follow on from a technology perspective and what you're living and breathing at the moment?
Yeah, I asked a question to the audience, like, does anyone remember phone numbers apart from their own? Because personally, I don't. And my husband goes on about me. He's like, do you even know my phone number? And it's like, embarrassingly, probably not. And so it's easy for us to say, oh yeah, if our reliance on technology would just phone people, but I don't remember anyone's phone number, let alone my own work number. So that's how much reliant we are on technology. So it's quite interesting that we're having this discussion, because it's quite scary.
Yeah. Or
it's
funny, like I saw a comment in there around uptime as well as an availability. And hey, I work for a SaaS platform. I get that question in literally every vendor assessment I go through, and it is an important one. But having a conversation with again on the Loss of Digital Supplier webinar, the question mark came down to, okay, just assume that the horse is bolted and the uptime, the 0.1% uptime is not there, or the downtime is there. So let's remove probability from the equation. What does it look like from a response perspective? Which again then falls on the shoulders of this audience. Remove the fact that it might be a low probability, high impact, but what happens when that actually materializes? What does the workaround look like if you lose your customer relationship management system, or or anything that's actually stitching the organization together across more than one department, across a cross-functional perspective, like Office 365 just went in. You're absolutely right. That happens. Anyway, we might keep moving. Otherwise, we could talk about technology all day. This one's somewhat linked. It's coming up in a lot of conversations. I think it has done for a while. There's obviously a lot of pressure around justifying the value of resilience at the moment. And I know a lot of people are there putting in business cases for more resources, because we're all feeling pretty stretched as well, because it's a pretty complex environment we're now working in, thanks to technology and thanks to all the opportunities it provides. The big questions coming back though, what's the ROI that this resilience team is actually bringing to the organization? And I want to open up a conversation, not just with yourselves, but also with the chat there, is how are you justifying the return on investment into resilience at the moment? What do you see as working? What's catching attention? And what's getting thrown out the window? Vanessa, Rina, who wants to kick into that?
I can kick us off. So my question, right, is rhetorical, right? So what's the objective of the program? Because I think it goes back to, if we know what the objective is, then what are we measuring? So I can speak from our business's perspective. One thing that we transitioned into over the past couple of years is everybody in my company is responsible and has to own a number. And then what we did is we said, okay, for every function, operations, sales, marketing, people, what are the activities or the functions that exist within that? And then what's the one metric that we need to be focused on? And then we said, okay, let's look at it from, I need two types of metrics. I need leading indicators that are almost real time. And then I need the lagging indicators that are historical. And for my business, I want 50% of our metrics to be leading in real time, so I can quickly change, because we're too small to wait. Right? We need to go. And because of the world that we live in and the nature of our work, waiting is a problem for folks like yourselves who are in a crisis-prone environment. And so from there, we took those numbers and then we tied it back to the profit and loss statement and the balance sheet. So it's very clear to us, every person in this company is adding value, and I literally have a line item that I know that you're contributing to. And so when you're not performing, I go back to the metric. And so in my humble opinion, I think business continuity is no different. There are a set of activities that you should be doing, whether it's every week, every day, or every month. How do you quantify that? You can measure, I think there's a book, How to Measure Anything or Everything. You can literally measure everything, right? And so I do believe that we've added value over the course of the pandemic. I think that the numbers could be greater, or our story could be communicated more effectively so people can understand the work that we do and what happens behind the scenes. But for our own business and even for our clients, having very clear numbers and driving accountability, because you can't have ROI or value without somebody being responsible and accountable. And so that's the second part on our chart is, well, who's accountable? They like putting my name. I'm like, nope, put somebody else's name. Yeah. Who do I pick up the phone and say, hey, this number's off. What's going on? Let's have a conversation about this.
Yeah, that's good. Rina?
Yeah, I agree with the accountability thing, because I get that all the time. Like, oh, it's your data, it's your plan. It's like, no, it's not. I helped you do it. So what are you going to do about it? Another way to do it. So Vanessa's talked about the financial side of it, which is great. But then what about the quality kind of maturity element? Are we actually looking at where were we a year ago or 6 months ago as a business in our program? And how are we comparing now 6 months later? What is the organization's maturity? What are the different teams' maturity? How do we sit as a business? And then how does that relate back to our risks? And then how are we mitigating that to achieve our organization's objectives or strategic objectives? So that maturity and assurance piece is something that I think a lot of practitioners don't get time to do. And personally, it's been something that I've never really had much time to do. It's like horizon scanning, isn't it? Who has time to really do that? Because you're too busy doing and actually not have time to sit back and think strategically. So the assurance piece, the maturity piece is something to invest your time in, because that will also help you add value and show the return on investment. Okay, all these people are doing this work and you were at 0 maturity and now you're at 50% maturity. That's surely in 6 months, that's pretty good, for example.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I mean, my co-founder Josh made a really good point there around actually understanding the objectives of the resilience program. When we typically sit down with a lot of organizations, we'll ask, what is the overarching objective here, so that we can essentially build a program that helps meet those objectives. And it is amazing how often we come across organizations that don't have an objective for the resilience program that ties back to the organization's objectives. One thing we'd always advocate is, do you understand the value metrics that the stakeholder you're supporting is chasing down as well? What are they accountable for? What is the HR director accountable for on their balanced scorecard? What is the CFO accountable for on their scorecard? And how does that look different when you talk about someone who's heading up customer or sales? What does that look like? And how are we supporting them get their number, which is often an important, unless you can find a shared language in terms of value, it's going to be really difficult to communicate and how we're measuring support that value creation in the organization. I think the other piece that comes with that is also getting an understanding of where does, apart from quantification value, which I think is really important, don't get me wrong, I think that's where we started the conversation, what does the cultural value look like? What does that metric look like in terms of improving the organization outside of purely just the numbers? Has anyone, encountered how they might enrich an organization a little bit beyond just the dollars and cents? Vanessa, I know you're pretty big on this.
Well, you know what? This is something that I've struggled with now that I'm a business owner and we're having different conversations as our business grows. I used to measure my personal performance based on revenue. And then when revenue didn't go the way I wanted to go, then I beat myself up about it, right? And so my peers and my colleagues, would have to reinforce, okay, well, what about your growth in leadership? What about the growth in influence? What about the growth of the team? What about the quality of the people? We intentionally make core value driven decisions, and we talk about it every week on our team calls and we acknowledge it. What about the fact that over 2 years, right, we've been able to double our retention rate for our company and focus specifically on our core values? And so I do agree with you that, you know, our team even said this week, I love the fact that we take the space to talk about how everybody's winning and not just the business. And we just take time to listen and connect. We send thank you cards. We have a, you know, what's your favorites list? Like, we really want to be intentional about, if I'm going to mail you something, I want it to be something that you actually like, right? So asking those important questions, or when we're having a one-on-one, like, not on my phone, be, you know, tied in and plugged into the people that I'm talking to. And so I agree with you that we have to create the space to recognize that people are people. And there are certain, what is it, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have basic needs that have to be met as individuals. And it's not just about the dollars and the cents.
Rina, what's your take on adding to the, I guess, the cultural fabric and trying to measure that as well?
Yeah, and that's definitely a challenge, because we do these things in our organizations. We spend like 1 week like fussing around with a business continuity awareness week, and then like nothing for the rest of the year or 2 years. And then the question is, we should be asking ourselves is training for resilience or business continuity actually integrated within the business? Does everybody do it? Do they know about it? Is it mandatory? And yes, there are hundreds and thousands of mandatory modules everybody has to do, which is annoying. So having something like business continuity extra is just too much hassle. I felt the pains. But then is these processes integrated? You know, when someone joins, do they get, you know, if you're running a mass notification tool and you're asking for personal numbers, do they get notified of that? Do they give consent? Do they understand that that's part of the culture? Because you're learning that from onboarding stage, that, oh, there's something like this happening. And then you get in, and is there like that constant stream? Is there someone who's responsible and consistent in the business, and not leaving every 6 months or every year, that you can actually go to? So if you have a question, you know, oh yeah, okay, Rina's in this team, I haven't spoken to her for 2 years, but I know she does this, so I'm going to go and ask her the question. That's a culture win for me. But then that takes time, but that also leads to, well, actually, are we retaining the staff or not, which is a different topic.
Well, it's different, but it's linked, and I'm going to get into the people side because it's a big issue right now. Yeah, Vanessa, sorry, before I...
Just a quick note. So that LinkedIn link that I posted, the other thing, going back to culture that it talked about, which, you know, that can be a whole nother conversation, is the evolution of company culture. So in this LinkedIn study, they go back to the 1950s, but if we're being honest with ourselves, we can go back to the 1400s. Right. And what was company culture like in the 1400s versus the 1500s versus the 60s, the 70s? And I think what we're seeing is there is almost a demand and a requirement from the transition of newcomers into the job market, people who are leaving and exiting, about how they want their environments at work to feel, to experience. And technology companies, I think, have been a huge contributor for how and why the work environment is changing and why people want different cultures, right? If you go to a Google campus or a Facebook campus, right, it doesn't feel like a bank. I mean, it just feels and looks so much different. And so I think that that's something else that we have to pay attention to, is just how things have evolved over time.
Yeah, indeed. And that, I was going to jump on another point, but that actually takes us right into the next one, which I may or may not come back to it, because people's a big issue, right? Talent at the moment is a massive issue, and the Great Resignation is unfolding, and we are seeing it in real time. Jobs for resilience is going up. They're not necessarily all getting filled. Do we have a fundamental talent crisis right now in our industry and in our discipline? And how do we fix that? I'm going to lob that one up. Anyone's free to take a swing at that, including the chat. including the chat.
Yeah, look, we definitely do, because there's hundreds of jobs out there. I think I was reading a study, I can't remember what it was, but there's like two for every job that for one job, there's like for one person, excuse me, there's two jobs. So there's a lot of choice. There's obviously monetary value, there's the flexibility, the options that it offers, and then you know, what's the benefits you're getting, is it better, the growth, all that kind of stuff is actually making people leave, because the retention's not there, because there's no investment, there's no room for growth. I feel like I'm going to go on to like hundreds of different topics here, so I'll just stop there for now, because there's just so many caveats. There's no flexibility. You're forced to do things like say go in the office and just be seen, because you're not trusted, so your talent is not trusted, you're not being developed, you're actually pushed back because people don't want you to succeed, and that happens a lot in corporate environments. It's cutthroat. Say like, you know, you might have a manager who doesn't want to see you progress or give you the credit, you're going to get frustrated, and then, you know, all that internal stuff happening is like annoying you basically, so you move, and then you're not getting a pay. You've not had a pay rise in the last 2 years, depends what industry you work in, and then obviously there's more choice, and you can get that elsewhere, especially with money and, you know, inflation going on.
So is this the tide going out, and a lot of leadership teams and organizations being caught without any, you know, trunks on, essentially? I mean, Vanessa, what's your take here?
Well, I think everything that Rina mapped out is what the Great Resignation is. It's essentially, I've been home for 2.5 years and I've been thinking. And I've been thinking some more. And I've been thinking some more. And I realized that I have a choice. Like I used to tell my employer, I don't have to be here. Like I choose to come to work on time. I choose to come back after lunch. I choose to come back the next day. I don't have to be here. So to Rina's point, the way you treat me, the way that you embrace me, the way that you support me, the way that you coach me goes back into my choices. I don't have to do this. So interestingly enough, from a US perspective, the Department of Labor Statistics, they've been tracking how often people leave the work environment since the 2000s. In 2021, the number jumped to the highest that it's ever been. 4 million people left their jobs every month in the United States, which totaled 47 million plus people who left their jobs. From a BCP perspective, thanks to BC and management, they came out with a recent article and showed that in business continuity from a labor market and Great Resignation perspective, the top 3 challenges are: we have a lot of demand because of what's happening in our world, right? We got a war, we got supply chain, all the things. We have very limited and very few professionals who are looking to change their jobs. For the ones who are in their seats and they're happy and they're comfortable, they're not leaving. And then we have a very small number of people in the talent pool to pull from. So our jobs and our profession, according to BC management, they're remaining open for a period of 90 to 120 plus days, which means the 90 to 120 days of work is not getting done, or value not going back to the organization, because we have a supply and a demand issue.
Also, to add to that, that some of the job descriptions are just ridiculous in terms of what the requirement is. So I've seen job openings like that for like good part of a year that work hasn't been done, and it's because they've rolled 2 jobs into 2 different disciplines. So obviously you're not going to have someone who could do both, and if they are, they're going to leave because that's why the other person left, and it's just not been, the feedback hasn't been incorporated into it. And then on the other flip side is there's expectations that you need to be doing this job 24/7 because you are remote for some, and then there's a whole load of mental health issues there, and people are quitting because of that. Because why would I do that? Like it's not always about the money as well, it's about that balance. And we were talking about this offline, weren't we? The work-life balance that you're getting because you've had time to think about it, as Vanessa quite rightly said. So there's all these factors happening that we need to be mindful of, and that we have the options. But it's not always easy.
You made a really good point around the job description piece as well, and I think we've touched on this briefly offline. Maybe it was with Vanessa when we were having a chat. It's like there's a lot of job descriptions out there say specifically 5 years experience, and I know when you spot a really good practitioner, it's actually probably more like 90% soft skills and 10% experience because they've been through some war stories and can hold their own in the conversation. Another 10%, technical skills, right? But it's 80% soft skills. So do we need to fundamentally change our mindset around who we bring into the industry based on skill as opposed to how to do a BIA? Question mark, which you can learn in literally 2 workshops.
Look, the short answer is yes. I think you get a certain type of person. That's just the bottom line. You get a certain type of person, and depending on your culture and the organization and what works for you, then that certain type of person may or may not work. Our clients, most of them don't even look for people that have experience anymore. They're looking for project managers, to your point, who can communicate and execute. Because most project managers are managing risk.
Yeah.
I know for me, I'm more interested if you're excited and passionate about the space that we're in, and you really want to come in and add value and really help people to think about what they're doing in their programs, I would hire you over somebody that had 20 years of experience any day. Because I don't have to unlearn or unteach you habits that don't work here. But to have to roll that back. I'm in a Bible study group, and I learned like 2 weeks ago for my faith, I have to unlearn independence so I can be dependent on my creator. I'm like, my mom and my dad taught me how to be independent. That requires a lot of intentionality and a lot of self-awareness for me to think about how to unlearn that behavior that's not going to be fruitful for my faith, right? So let's think about all the bad habits we've accumulated in these corporate environments.
Yeah, so true, so true. And it's I think I said this a few times. It's you could have like 20 years experience but no clue whatsoever, so you need emotional intelligence or quotient, or whatever you want to call it, and that's so key. When I'm hiring, I always look for potential rather than they've got a qualification in this, because still that it's nice to have, but with the right attitude and right potential, you can get a really good person. And I've done that. I've hired a person who didn't have a BCM qualification, and like she's gone on to do amazing things now after like working with me, and like it's really successful because we saw potential in that person.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's, I guess, one pivoting a little bit, but very much tied to the Great Resignation. One thing that we all seem to be experiencing around the world through these conversations, and obviously just keeping abreast of the headlines everywhere, is inflation risk. So obviously the world went through COVID, dumped a heap of money on itself, dug a bit more of a debt hole, as we've all seen. And now we're dealing with, I guess, the lag effect of inflation coming back to bite us, which then obviously impacts purchase price parity, what you can essentially get with your dollar from work, which affects what salaries need to look like, which affects attracting people at the right rate, which affects some organizations that can afford to do that versus some organizations that can't afford to do that. Namely public sector is a great example where the pay rates don't move all that often. I guess a question mark here, where does inflation risk and talent integrate into talent risk on our agendas at the moment, and how are we shaping that conversation in our organizations to take it into account? Because inflation is not going to just stop at the end of the year when Christmas comes around. Thoughts?
Quick thought, I think it goes back to actually a comment that Josh has in the chat about, how are we helping other business units, not just business resilience, but fill their vacancies. I think this goes back to the need for partnerships in the business, and specifically, I think business continuity and risk and resilience professionals need a better partnership and more alignment with human resources. They're like the center of risk right now with the Great Resignation. And we are planners, so we have a specific skill set that they can leverage. And I think this is a way that we can go back and provide value. So now what I'm seeing is HR teams need audits, they need assessments, they need an evaluation on, what's the most critical components of your business? What are the critical roles? Do we have those people here from a local perspective? If we don't, how much are we spending? Do I have to go back to my CFO to help make that offer? Oh, and then by the way, as our business grows and as the company culture grows, how do we build an HR recruitment and a hiring and a DE&I strategy that encompasses who we are, who we say we are, who we want to be, and the roles to support that? And so I really think that there is truly some alignment that we need to have with these teams and really walk through what does the succession plan look like. And oh, by the way, I found a study that showed literally 50% of businesses are planning for CEOs and their successions. So if you think about the Fortune 500 list, that means 50% of them are not planning for it. To include, most companies are spending 2 hours a year on succession planning. So here's the question for the chat. How long does it take you to plan your business continuity or your crisis management plan? I can guarantee you it's more than 2 hours. So if the CEO's not doing it, and honestly, it's not even the most critical role. The critical role is everybody else who reports to him or her. Like, just think about that. And then here's a kicker. How many BCP people have succession planning in your daily activities?
That's a great question for the chat. Who is working on succession planning right now or has in the last 6 months?
I'd love to know that, because I've not seen anywhere in any organization I've worked for do this, because it's politics. Everybody's building. If you're at that position, you're building your empire. So you're not going to succession plan, or you're trying to keep people in their place if you're that way inclined. It's a very cutthroat world out there where you're thinking about yourself and your own opportunities. So why would you think about somebody else? And then that's another thing on top of your role as a resilience professional. Right, so now I have to go and talk to HR, and which you should be doing anyway, because we're in that position where we know a lot about different areas of the business. But now I've got another added responsibility to manage somebody else's process that they should have got right in the first place, because they should have had compliance activities and should know about this, or at least speak to management about doing succession planning for key roles like ours, which isn't seen as key roles, which then fuels the whole point of, well, inflation is high, why should I bother? Why am I doing so much work for nothing in return? Is to help me maintain my basic cost of living. And so my question to the audience is, have you ever thought about packing it all in and being part of this great resignation? And
then on that, do you have the succession plan in place for your own resignation? But it's a great question. Like with the Great Resignation, we've been talking about this for 12 months, like the Great Resignation. If 100% of us aren't thinking about the Great Succession for the Great Resignation, then we're in trouble.
I think you should quote that.
Royalty free, it's okay. It's okay. But quite honestly, if this is the biggest thing, this has gone around the world, right? The Great Resignation is not something we just talk about in Australia. It's something that gets talked about in Europe, in the UK, in the United States for sure. Like that's all I heard when I was in the States last, is the Great Resignation. This is a global phenomenon that's taking place in the professional world at the moment, yet there's no great succession that we seem to be working on. Like if 100% of us aren't working on that, we have a big risk. Sorry, that's probably not a question, is it? It's just a form.
Yeah.
Okay. How the chat's going bananas, which is really good. I hate to say it, we're actually coming up to the top of the hour again. guys, I want to take a moment. Is there any other final thoughts here? I mean, something you want to take back or want people to take back as they go back to their, well, in Australia, it's nearly 7 a.m. They're wanting into their business day. I know it's the evening in the UK and the afternoon in the US. But Vanessa, what's the one thing you want people to have a think about before we go to the next big resilience reset? That by the time we come back to that next chat, something may have been thought about and worked on.
Well, right now I'm laughing at Alex's note in the chat. I was a great resignator with no succession plan in place.
Just microphone dropped.
For all of the reasons that Rina talked about.
Get it.
So, but on a serious note, the one takeaway that I have for people is to focus on the partnership with human resources and succession planning with your teams. I think it's very critical for us to identify the essential skills that are missing within our organization for where they're going. I think we really have to create a mechanism for how we are going to retain institutional knowledge, whether you're a nonprofit, a business, it doesn't matter. And I think we have to clearly define the scope of the needs of our talent so that we're explicitly clear about what we're looking for and not, focus on things that are not going to add value back to the organization. But at this point, it's no longer an emerging threat. It's here.
Good point. Very good point. Rina?
I would say to firstly look inwards with regards to your own personal resilience. There's so much going on. There's always going to be stuff happening, hybrid world, political, everything like that. Are you in the right frame of mind to be picking up all this stuff? And do you have the capacity and have you looked after your own personal resilience to thrive and revive in any situation? And if not, why not? And take that first step, because if you don't, then all the stuff we've talked about is going to be pointless. And then you're just going to want to pack it in anyway, because at times personally I felt like that. And then I thought, actually I'm not focusing on myself and what I need first. So think about that.
Yeah, and I think if there's one thing I'd probably just almost tapping on that a little bit, Rina, is we are going through this hybrid. It's a new environment, and touching on your point before, Vanessa, do we have to unlearn? Do we need to think about unlearning all the things that we did pre-hybrid environment and actually starting with a very fresh slate and saying, well, this is actually what it means to work in this organization from a people perspective, from an hours perspective, from a productivity perspective, from a measurement and metric perspective. If you could have a clean slate, what would that look like to build the resilient powerhouse of the future that gets talked about at every conference we go to? That would be my 2 cents. I'm going to have to wrap it up there.